Someone fell into the lake. The cry shattered the calm of the afternoon like a crack of thunder. The surface of Lake Monroe rippled beneath a bruised gray sky as people on the dock froze. A child had slipped from the edge, her small figure thrashing in the icy water. For a moment, no one moved. Phones were out, mouths open, but feet rooted to the wooden planks. Then a voice, high and certain, cut through the chaos. "I can swim." It belonged to a little black girl, no older than 9. She dropped her small backpack, kicked off her sneakers, and leaped. The splash broke the spell that fear had cast over everyone. The lake swallowed her in a heartbeat, the cold biting into her skin, but she did not stop. Her arms pushed forward through the freezing waves, her breath sharp and shallow. The little girl ahead was sinking fast, her pink jacket blooming like a flower beneath the water. The black girl dove, eyes open against the burn, and reached for the jacket sleeve. Her fingers caught it. The weight pulled her down, but she kicked hard, bubbles bursting from her mouth like silver sparks. "Hold on," she gasped, voice trembling. She had no idea whose child it was, only that someone needed her. On the shore, a man in a dark coat broke from the crowd. His heart slammed against his ribs as he recognized the jacket. "Sophie!" he shouted, the name ripped out of him like a wound. It was his daughter. The billionaire Marcus Hale ran into the water, shoes and all, but by the time he reached the dock's edge, 2 small heads broke the surface. The black girl pushed the other child forward with both arms, kicking with desperate rhythm. "Take her," she cried. A pair of hands reached down and pulled Sophie up. The girl lay coughing, water streaming from her mouth, but she was alive. Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, voice shaking. "Baby, breathe. Please breathe." Then he looked up. The black girl was still in the water, her small hands gripping the edge of the dock, trembling from the cold. He reached down instantly and hauled her up. She was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Her lips were blue, her braids dripping across her face. For a heartbeat, the world went silent except for the sound of 2 children breathing. Marcus wrapped his jacket around her shoulders. "Why did you do that?" he asked softly, still breathless. She blinked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because no one else would." The words hit him harder than the wind. Around them, people murmured, some clapping, others filming, but Marcus heard none of it. He looked at the child who had just risked her life for his daughter and felt something shift deep inside his chest, something that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with awakening. The girl's eyes fluttered as she whispered, "Is she okay?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak. The sirens wailed in the distance, but in that moment, the only sound that mattered was the steady rhythm of Sophie's breathing and the quiet heartbeat of the little girl who had saved her. The flashing lights painted the lake in red and blue as the ambulance doors slammed shut. Marcus Hale stood in the cold mud, soaked to his knees, watching the paramedics tend to his daughter. Sophie was wrapped in a silver blanket, her breathing steady now. The little black girl sat on the tailgate of another ambulance, shivering beneath Marcus's heavy jacket that nearly swallowed her whole. Steam rose from her skin as the medic wrapped a towel around her shoulders and placed a cup of hot cocoa in her trembling hands. She stared at it for a moment as if unsure whether she was allowed to drink it. "Go ahead, sweetheart," the medic said gently. "You earned it." Marcus's throat tightened at those words. Earned it. The girl had done what no adult had dared to do. He walked closer, his polished shoes squelching in the wet grass. He had never felt more out of place in his own world. "How is she?" he asked the paramedic standing beside Sophie. "Stable, sir. Cold shock, but she is a lucky little one. She would not be if that girl had not jumped in when she did." Marcus turned toward the girl again. She was small, maybe 8 or 9, skin glistening with droplets that caught the glow of the ambulance lights. Her hair hung in braids that clung to her cheeks. She looked up when she noticed him watching. "Is she okay?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded. "She is going to be fine, thanks to you." The girl exhaled in relief, her breath forming a pale cloud. "That is good," she whispered. She was so scared. I just kept telling her to kick her legs. He crouched beside her, feeling his expensive coat brush the damp ground. "You knew how to swim like that?" She shrugged lightly. "My grandma says water does not scare you if you respect it. I swim at the public pool when they let me in." There was no pride in her voice, only a calm simplicity that made his chest ache. "What is your name?" he asked. "Lila," she said, eyes darting down to the cup in her hands. "Lila Brown." "Lila," he repeated slowly, as if committing it to memory. "You saved my daughter's life." She shook her head quickly. "No, sir. I just did what anyone would do." Marcus almost smiled, but it was sad, weary. "Not anyone, Lila. Everyone was frozen. You moved." She blinked, unsure how to respond. The medic returned with a blanket and helped wrap it around her. "She needs to get warm," the woman said kindly. "Do you know how to reach her parents?" Marcus expected an answer, but Lila hesitated. Her gaze dropped to the wet ground. "It is just me and Grandma," she said. "She works nights. She will be worried if I am late." Marcus felt something twist inside him. A billionaire used to solving problems with checks and contracts. Yet here stood a child who had risked everything without asking for anything. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, the edges damp. "I want to thank your grandmother," he said. "Can I drive you home?" Lila's eyes widened slightly, unsure if it was a trick. "It is okay, sir. We live close, just a few blocks from here." He glanced toward the dark street stretching beyond the park, where the streetlights flickered and the air smelled faintly of rain and metal. "At least let me have my driver take you," he said. "It is too cold for walking." She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Only if I can tell Grandma first." Marcus motioned to his assistant, who had just arrived breathless from the car. "Bring the car around," he said quietly. As they walked toward the vehicle, Sophie stirred from the stretcher, eyes fluttering open. "Daddy," she whispered. He turned instantly. "I am here, baby." She smiled weakly. "The girl, did she make it?" He looked back at Lila, who was watching from the distance, her small figure haloed by the spinning lights. "Yes," he said. "She is okay." Sophie's voice cracked softly. "Can we say thank you?" Marcus swallowed hard. "We will, I promise." The car door opened with a soft click, and the smell of leather and heat spilled into the cold night. Lila climbed in carefully, clutching the cocoa cup in both hands. Marcus sat across from her, studying the way she tried not to drip on the seat. "You do not have to worry about the car," he said gently. "It is only leather." She gave a tiny smile. "Grandma says you should take care of things that are not yours." "Your grandma sounds wise," Marcus replied. "She says a lot of things," Lila murmured. The ride was quiet except for the hum of the tires and the distant wail of sirens fading behind them. Marcus stared out the window, but his mind replayed the image of a small body leaping into the lake without hesitation. When the car finally stopped in front of a rundown apartment complex, Lila pointed to a flickering light on the second floor. "That is us." Marcus followed her gaze. The building looked tired, its paint peeling, its windows glowing dimly behind threadbare curtains. Lila turned to him before stepping out. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Hale." "Thank you, Lila," he said softly. "For everything." She nodded, then handed him his jacket back, still damp but warm. He took it without a word, watching as she climbed the stairs, small and determined. When she reached the door, a light came on inside, and a shadow moved across the curtain. Lila paused and waved once before disappearing inside. Marcus stood by the car, holding the wet jacket against his chest, the cold wind stinging his face. Somewhere deep in him, something unfamiliar stirred a mix of guilt, gratitude, and awe. For the first time in years, he whispered to himself words he had almost forgotten how to mean. "Thank you, God, for sending her." Behind him, the lake shimmered faintly under the moonlight, quiet now, as if holding its breath in memory of the little girl who had jumped without hesitation. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the tall glass windows of Marcus Hale's estate, casting golden lines across the marble floor. He sat at the edge of his daughter's bed, watching her breathe. Sophie was still pale, but her chest rose and fell steadily. Every few seconds, she murmured softly in her sleep. On the bedside table sat the small hospital bracelet, a silent reminder of the night before. Marcus rubbed his hands together, still feeling the chill of that water. The scent of lake mud and cold wind seemed to cling to him. He had barely slept, replaying the image of the little girl in his mind, Lila, her thin arms breaking through the waves, her voice trembling but fierce. He had seen courage before in boardrooms and crises, but never like that. This was not strategy or gain. It was pure instinct, selfless and real. When the housekeeper knocked and announced that breakfast was ready, he nodded absently. "Tell them to wait." His assistant, Michael, entered quietly, holding a tablet. "Sir, the story is spreading fast. Someone recorded the rescue on their phone. It is all over the news. They are calling her the Lake Angel." Marcus looked up sharply. "The what?" "The Lake Angel. A little black girl saves the billionaire's daughter. That is the headline." He handed the tablet over. Marcus watched the shaky footage, the crowd's shouts. The moment two small figures surfaced, it made his chest tighten. Lila's face flashed briefly determined, exhausted, radiant. He could almost hear her whisper again, because no one else would. He closed the video slowly. "Does anyone know who she is?" Michael shook his head. "No, sir." The footage ends before anyone got her name. Reporters are asking questions, but so far, no one has found her. Marcus stared at the window where the sunlight hit the glass like ripples. "Find her," he said quietly. "Not for a story, for me." Later that day, when Sophie woke, she held his hand weakly. "Daddy, did she get home safe?" He nodded. "She did. She lives with her grandmother." Sophie smiled faintly. "Can we see her?" "We will," he promised, smoothing her hair back. "But you need to rest first." Outside, the world was moving fast. News vans parked near the park where it happened. Commentators praised the bravery of an unknown child. Strangers left flowers by the lake, some with notes that read, "For the brave little girl who reminded us what courage looks like." Marcus watched it unfold with a strange mix of pride and discomfort. He had built companies worth billions, but none of it had inspired this kind of emotion. That afternoon, he made a decision. He left the mansion quietly, without an entourage, driving himself in a simple sedan. He remembered Lila's directions, just a few blocks from the park, and followed them. The neighborhood looked even smaller in daylight. The buildings leaned into each other, tired and faded. Laundry lines stretched between balconies, and a stray cat darted under a rusted car. He parked near the apartment complex and climbed the stairs he had watched her climb the night before. His knock echoed down the narrow hallway. After a moment, the door creaked open. A woman in a faded robe appeared, her eyes cautious but kind. "Can I help you?" Marcus removed his cap politely. "Good afternoon, ma'am. My name is Marcus Hale. I believe your granddaughter, Lila, helped my daughter last night." The woman's expression softened instantly. "You are Sophie's father," she said quietly. "Lila told me what happened. She was worried all night." She stepped aside. "Come in, please." The apartment was small but tidy, smelling faintly of soap and cornbread. On the counter sat a row of neatly stacked dishes. In the corner, Lila sat at a small table, drawing with a broken crayon. When she saw Marcus, her eyes widened in surprise. "Mr. Hale?" she whispered. He smiled gently. "You remember me?" "Yes, sir." She stood quickly, almost knocking over her chair. "Is Sophie okay?" "She is doing very well," he said. "She wanted me to tell you thank you." Lila exhaled in relief. "That is good. I was scared she might not wake up." Her grandmother placed a hand on her shoulder. "We are proud of her, Mr. Hale. She has always had a brave heart." Marcus nodded, looking around the room. There were signs of struggle peeling paint, a flickering light but also warmth, a knitted blanket on the couch, a vase of wildflowers on the windowsill. "You have raised an incredible young lady," he said sincerely. "If there is anything you need, anything at all," the woman raised a hand gently. "We do not take charity, Mr. Hale. My granddaughter did what she thought was right. That is enough." Marcus respected that, but something in her tone struck deep. "It is not charity," he said quietly. "It is gratitude." Lila looked up at him then, eyes wide and honest. "You do not have to give us anything," she said softly. "Just maybe make the lake cleaner. There is trash in it. Fish get stuck." The simplicity of her request stunned him. He nodded slowly. "You have my word." As he left, Lila ran to the doorway. "Tell Sophie I said hi," she called. He turned and smiled. "I will, and maybe next time, you can tell her yourself." As he walked back to his car, Marcus felt the air shift. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not filled with profits or deadlines, but with the echo of a child's courage and the quiet dignity of those who had nothing yet still gave everything. Somewhere deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. 3 days passed before Marcus returned to the small apartment on Maple Avenue. He had told himself it was to bring flowers for Lila's grandmother. But deep down, he knew that was not the real reason. Something about that home, simple and honest, had stayed with him. His world of endless meetings and glass walls suddenly felt hollow compared to the laughter that echoed from that modest kitchen. When he arrived, the afternoon sun was sliding low, turning the windows gold. He carried a paper bag with bread, soup, and a jar of honey things his housekeeper had insisted on packing. He knocked gently. This time, Lila opened the door herself. Her face lit up with surprise. "Mr. Hale," she said. "You came back." He smiled. "I did not want to bother you, but I promised Sophie she could say thank you in person." Her eyes widened. "Sophie is here?" "In the car," he said. "She is still a little shy, but she really wanted to see you." Lila glanced at her grandmother, who was stirring a pot of stew on the stove. The older woman nodded warmly. "Go ahead, baby. Be polite." Outside, the air smelled faintly of rain and gasoline. Sophie sat in the back seat, holding a bouquet of small white daisies. Her face lit up when she saw Lila approach. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," Lila replied. "Those are pretty." Sophie smiled. "They are for you. My dad said you like flowers." Lila took them carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you." There was a brief silence before Sophie spoke again. "I remember the water. You told me to kick my legs. I was so scared." "Me too," Lila admitted. "But Grandma says being brave does not mean you are not scared. It means you do what is right anyway." Sophie nodded thoughtfully, holding onto that sentence like a new truth. Marcus stood by the car door, watching the exchange. Something inside him softened as he listened to the simple conversation between two children, one born into wealth, the other into struggle, yet both meeting on the same ground of courage and kindness. When Lila's grandmother called them in for stew, Marcus and Sophie followed. The small apartment felt even cozier this time. The scent of herbs filled the air. On the wall, faded family photographs hung in uneven frames. Marcus sat at the table, feeling strangely at ease, as Lila set out bowls. "You do not have to serve me," he said gently. She grinned. "Grandma says guests should always eat first." Her grandmother chuckled. "Do not argue with her, Mr. Hale. She runs this house better than I ever could." They laughed together, and for a moment the difference in their worlds faded. Over dinner, Marcus listened more than he spoke. Lila told stories about her school, about helping the librarian fix a broken shelf, about wanting to be a swimming teacher someday. Sophie's eyes widened. "You want to teach swimming?" "Yes," Lila said proudly, "so no one will be scared of water again." Marcus felt something catch in his throat. He had spent millions funding scholarships and foundations, but he had never heard a mission so pure. When the meal ended, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small blue box. "This is not payment," he said quickly, noticing their hesitation. "It is just a gift." Inside was a simple silver bracelet, with a small charm shaped like a wave. "For the lake angel," he said softly. Lila gasped. "It is beautiful," she whispered, "but I do not know if I should." Her grandmother touched her shoulder. "Take it, baby. It is a blessing." Lila looked at Marcus. "Thank you. I will take care of it." "You already take care of everything that matters," he replied. On their way out, Sophie hugged Lila tightly. "Can we be friends?" she asked. "We already are," Lila said. Marcus watched the moment unfold, realizing that something rare and precious had formed between them, something no money could buy or control. As he and Sophie drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror. Lila stood at the doorway waving, the silver bracelet catching the last light of the setting Sunday. Sophie held her bouquetless hands together and whispered, "She is really special, Daddy." Marcus nodded. "Yes, she reminds me of someone I used to be." That night, as rain began to fall softly against the glass walls of his mansion, Marcus stood by the window, the city stretching below like a map of forgotten promises. He thought of Lila's words about bravery and doing what is right anyway. Somewhere far across town, in a tiny apartment that smelled like stew and soap, A little girl placed the wave-shaped bracelet beside her bed and whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. And though neither of them knew it yet, their paths had only just begun to weave together, tied by one act of courage that had reached far beyond the cold water of the lake. The following week brought a calm that felt almost unreal to Marcus Hale. For years, his life had been driven by schedules, market calls, and headlines that celebrated success but never peace. Now, the sound that lingered in his mind was not applause or profit, but the laughter of two little girls echoing across a quiet park. Every afternoon, Sophie asked when they could visit Lila again, and every time Marcus found fewer reasons to say no. He had already spoken with Lila's grandmother, who agreed that the girls could spend time together as long as Lila finished her homework first. It became their small ritual. Sophie and Marcus would drive to Maple Avenue every Saturday morning, bringing pastries and a basket of fruit, and Lila would greet them at the top of the stairs with her radiant smile. On the third visit, Marcus brought an envelope. "I wanted to talk to you and your grandmother," he said to Lila, trying to keep his tone gentle. "There is something I would like to offer." Her grandmother wiped her hands on a towel and looked at him cautiously. "You have already done more than enough, Mr. Hale. Please," he said softly, "call me Marcus." He took a breath. "I want to help Lila attend a better school. She is brilliant, and I have seen her determination. She deserves every chance to grow." Lila's eyes widened, unsure how to respond. "A new school?" she whispered. "Would it be far?" "Not far," Marcus replied. "It is in the same district, but with smaller classes and a swimming program. You said you wanted to teach swimming one day. Maybe this is the first step." The older woman studied him carefully, sensing the sincerity behind his words. "You are not offering charity, are you?" she asked. "No," Marcus said. "I am offering opportunity. What she did for my daughter changed my life. I want to honor that by giving her something that lasts." Lila looked down at her silver bracelet, fingers tracing the tiny wave charm. "If Grandma says it is okay, then I will try," she said quietly. Her grandmother smiled and nodded. "Then it is settled." That afternoon, Marcus drove them to see the school. It was a modest building with clean hallways and bright windows that overlooked a pool shimmering in the sunday. Lila pressed her face against the glass, eyes wide with wonder. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Would I really go here?" "If you want to," Marcus said. "You earned it." As they toured the campus, Sophie walked beside her, holding her hand. "We can eat lunch together," Sophie said. "They have peanut butter sandwiches and fruit cups." Lila laughed softly. "I have never eaten lunch in a cafeteria before." "Then we will learn together," Sophie said firmly. Watching them, Marcus felt a quiet satisfaction he could not explain. The two girls, one from luxury and one from hardship, looked completely at ease in each other's company. It was as if the world outside their laughter did not matter. When they returned home, Lila ran upstairs to show her grandmother the school brochure. Marcus lingered by the doorway, feeling the warmth of their joy filling the small apartment. The grandmother turned to him. "You are a good man, Marcus," she said. "But sometimes good men forget that giving too much can make others feel small. Thank you for remembering her dignity." He nodded respectfully. "She reminds me of what dignity really means." Before he left, Lila handed him a folded paper. "It is a drawing," she said shyly, "of the lake. I drew it from memory." Marcus unfolded it and saw two figures in the water, one saving the other, light shimmering above them like hope itself. "It is incredible," he said softly. "May I keep it?" She nodded. "It is for you and Sophie, so you do not forget." On the drive back to his mansion, Marcus placed the drawing on the dashboard. The city skyline loomed ahead, but he barely noticed. His thoughts were filled with the image of a small girl who had taught him that real courage was not loud, not showy. It was quiet, wet, cold, and trembling, yet it never gave up. That night, Sophie framed the drawing and hung it in her bedroom. When Marcus walked by and saw it glowing under the soft lamplight, he felt an unfamiliar peace settle over him. He realized that the richest gift he could ever give his daughter was not wealth or luxury, but the presence of people like Lila, people who reminded her that kindness was strength. Outside, the city hummed as always, but for once Marcus did not feel like part of the noise. He stood by the window, thinking about the little girl on Maple Avenue and the future she might build. In his heart, a decision was already forming, one that would change both their lives even more than the rescue at the lake ever had. The morning after Lila's first visit to the new school, Marcus received a phone call that made his chest tighten. It was the principal. Her voice was polite but worried. "Mr. Hale, Lila never arrived today," she said. Marcus glanced at his watch. It was 9:30 in the morning. He had personally driven her there the day before and watched her smile as she toured the classrooms. "Are you certain?" he asked, standing up from his desk. "Yes, sir. We checked attendance twice. Her grandmother also has not answered our calls." Marcus felt a chill run through him. "Thank you. I will look into it." He hung up and immediately dialed the number he had saved from the small slip of paper Lila's grandmother had given him. No one answered. The line went to voicemail, then silence. Within minutes, he was in his car, speeding toward Maple Avenue. The closer he got, the heavier the sky seemed to turn. When he arrived, the apartment door was cracked open. Inside, the air was still, the stew pot from last night cold on the stove. The grandmother's shoes were gone, her purse missing, but what caught his attention was the note taped to the table, written in a careful child's hand. "Mr. Hale, Grandma had to go to the hospital this morning. I will visit her and come back before school. Please do not worry. Love, Lila." Marcus read the words twice. Then his phone buzzed again. It was Michael, his assistant. "Sir, the hospital just called. Mrs. Brown was admitted early this morning. She collapsed on her way to work. They have been trying to reach family." Marcus's heart sank. "I am on my way." He drove straight to St. Mary's Hospital. The corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. A nurse led him to a small waiting area. Through the window, he saw Lila sitting in a plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the silver bracelet glinting under the fluorescent lights. When she saw him, she jumped to her feet. "Mr. Hale," she said, eyes wide and red from crying. "They said Grandma fainted. She has been sleeping a long time." Marcus crouched down to her level. "She will be okay," he said gently. "The doctors are doing everything they can." She nodded, though her small shoulders trembled. "They said she is tired. She works too much." "You have been very brave," he said softly. "You came here all by yourself?" "The bus driver helped me," she said. "I told him my grandma was sick, and he said I did not have to pay." Marcus swallowed hard. Even in fear, this child found kindness around her. Hours passed. Marcus called his office to reschedule every meeting. He sat with Lila in silence as the clock hands turned slowly. Finally, the doctor appeared, smiling. "She is stable," he said. "Exhaustion and dehydration. We will keep her overnight for observation." Lila exhaled in relief and whispered, "Thank you, God." The doctor looked at Marcus. "You are family?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded once. "Yes, I am." It was not true in the legal sense, but it felt true in every other way. When Lila was allowed to see her grandmother, Marcus followed quietly. The older woman looked pale but peaceful. Lila climbed into the chair beside her bed and held her hand. "Grandma, you scared me," she whispered. Her grandmother smiled weakly. "I am sorry, baby. I guess I forgot to rest." Marcus stood at the doorway, watching the moment unfold. Something in him shifted again, deeper this time. He had spent years controlling every outcome in his life, but here was a family that lived on faith and love, not control, and somehow it was stronger than anything he had built. When they left the hospital that evening, the sun was setting in soft pink and orange streaks across the sky. Marcus insisted they stay at his estate for a few nights while her grandmother recovered. Lila shook her head. "It is too big," she said. "We will get lost." He smiled. "Then we will find our way together." She hesitated, then agreed. That night, for the first time, Lila and her grandmother walked through the grand doors of the Hale mansion. The marble floors gleamed under soft lights, and Sophie came running down the hallway barefoot, her laughter echoing. "Lila!" she shouted, throwing her arms around her. Lila laughed too, the sound bright and clear, filling the cold house with warmth. Marcus stood behind them, watching as the girls ran toward the kitchen where the chef had prepared hot chocolate. His home, once silent and empty, now felt alive. Later, as Lila sat by the fireplace, Her eyes began to droop. Sophie leaned against her shoulder, whispering something that made them both giggle. The silver bracelet caught the flickering light, glinting like a promise. Marcus stood at the doorway, feeling a peace he had not known in years. For the first time, he realized that perhaps this was what family meant, not wealth or blood, but the act of showing up, again and again, for someone who needed you. When the clock struck 9, the housekeeper gently carried the girls to the guest room. Marcus lingered by the fire, thinking of how quickly life had changed. A small act of courage at a lake had turned strangers into something more, a connection that neither time nor circumstance could undo. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the windows, but inside, the warmth stayed, steady and sure, like a quiet heartbeat that promised there was still good left in the world. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the wide windows of the Hale mansion, washing the room in gentle gold. Lila woke slowly, blinking at the unfamiliar ceiling. The sheets were soft like clouds, and the scent of fresh linen filled the air. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then she heard Sophie giggle beside her, whispering to the housekeeper, and the memory of everything returned like a dream too good to be real. "Good morning," Sophie said, peeking over the blanket. "My dad made pancakes." Lila sat up, startled. "Your dad cooked?" "Well," Sophie said, laughing, "he tried." Downstairs, Marcus stood in the kitchen wearing an apron far too clean for someone actually cooking. A faint trail of flour crossed his sleeve. When he saw the girls appear, he lifted the spatula like a proud soldier. "Breakfast is served," he said. Lila covered her mouth, hiding a smile. Sophie whispered, "He is terrible at it, but do not tell him." Marcus looked at them both with mock seriousness. "I heard that." The girls burst into laughter, and the sound filled the marble hallways with life. The smell of syrup and butter floated through the air, soft and comforting. It was the kind of morning Marcus had forgotten existed. The kind that did not require meetings or deadlines, only laughter and warmth. After breakfast, Lila followed Sophie through the garden behind the mansion. The air was cool and sweet, the grass wet from last night's rain. Beyond the trimmed hedges stood a large pool, its surface smooth like glass. Lila stopped, her breath catching. Sophie noticed. "Do you want to swim?" Lila shook her head slowly. "It is too fancy. I am used to the lake." "Then you can teach me the lake way," Sophie said. "Dad says you are the bravest swimmer he has ever met." Lila blushed. "I just did what anyone should do." "No," Sophie said, her voice small but certain. "Not everyone jumps. You did." Those words lingered in the air. Marcus watched from the patio, his heart full and heavy at the same time. He saw in Lila the same fire that once burned in him before success had buried it under layers of fear and routine. Later that afternoon, while the girls painted in the sunroom, Marcus met with Lila's grandmother. She sat on the couch, hands folded neatly in her lap, wearing one of Sophie's old cardigans. "You have given us more kindness than we could ever repay," she said. "But I need to ask, what is it that you truly want from all this?" Marcus hesitated. "Nothing," he said honestly. "I only want Lila to have the opportunities she deserves. She reminds me of something I lost long ago." The woman studied him carefully. "You mean faith?" He nodded slowly. "Maybe so." She smiled faintly. "Then you found it again, Mr. Hale, because faith often hides in children who still believe the world can be good." The rest of the day unfolded softly. Sophie showed Lila her favorite books. Lila shared how she used to read stories to her grandmother under a flickering lamp when the power went out. As the sun dipped low, Marcus invited them all to dinner on the patio. Candles flickered against the twilight. "To new beginnings," he said, raising a glass of sparkling cider. The girls clinked their glasses together with a giggle. "To bravery," Sophie added. Lila nodded. "And to kindness." After dinner, the girls ran off toward the garden, chasing fireflies. Marcus sat quietly, watching them. The sight reminded him of his late wife, who used to collect fireflies with Sophie when she was younger. He had not thought of those nights in years. Lila's laughter carried across the garden, light and unguarded. It filled the spaces in his heart he did not know were still empty. As the sky turned violet, Lila's grandmother leaned toward him. "You know she will not stay this fearless forever," she said gently. "The world can be unkind to children like her." Marcus looked at the two girls dancing in the flickering light. Then I will make sure she always has a place where the world cannot hurt her, he said quietly. You cannot protect her from everything, the woman replied, but you can remind her she is never alone. When night fell, Marcus walked the guests to their rooms. Lila paused at her doorway. Thank you for letting us stay, she said. I have never slept anywhere this big before. Marcus smiled softly. Big houses are not special, Lila. The people inside them are. She looked at him thoughtfully, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then maybe it is special now, she said, and closed the door. Marcus stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the faint sound of laughter fading into silence. For the first time in years, the mansion felt alive not with wealth, but with something far rarer, something fragile and human. Later, when he passed the living room, he noticed the framed drawing Lila had given him resting on the mantel. The moonlight touched the paper, reflecting the two figures in the lake the moment their lives had intertwined. He touched the edge of the frame gently, whispering almost to himself, "Thank you, Lila." Upstairs, the two girls slept side by side, their dreams light and untroubled. And though the night outside stretched wide and dark, within the Hale mansion there was a warmth that no storm could reach, a quiet truth that courage and kindness could still change even the coldest hearts. The next few weeks passed like gentle waves rolling against the shore, steady and full of quiet change. Every morning the Hale mansion woke to the soft sound of laughter, the rustle of small footsteps down the hallway, and the smell of breakfast that Marcus no longer delegated to his staff. He had begun to find peace in simple acts, pouring juice for Sophie, checking Lila's homework, driving both girls to school in the same car. The once cold corridors of his house now echoed with warmth, as if the walls themselves were learning how to smile. Lila's grandmother had recovered well and returned home, but Marcus insisted that she rest often, promising that his driver would bring Lila to visit her daily. On weekends, he drove the two girls to the community pool where Lila helped Sophie learn to float. The first time Sophie lifted her arms and trusted the water, Marcus had to turn away to hide the sting of tears behind his eyes. "You are doing it," Lila cheered from beside her. "See, it is not so scary," Sophie grinned proudly, "because I have the best teacher." The lifeguard whistled in approval, and for a fleeting second Marcus wished the whole world could see this, how bravery looked when it was small, wet, and smiling. Later that afternoon, Lila sat beside Marcus on the bleachers, wrapping her towel tightly around her shoulders. "Mr. Hale," she said, "why do people always look sad even when they have everything?" The question startled him. He looked down at her, at the honesty in her eyes. "Maybe because they forget what everything really means." "And what does it mean?" she asked. He thought for a long time before answering. "It means having people to care about, not things to own." She nodded thoughtfully. "Then you have everything now?" Her words pierced him with truth. That evening, Marcus visited Maple Avenue with a truck full of volunteers from his company. He had quietly organized a project to repair streetlights, repaint playgrounds, and provide books for the local library. When the first light flickered back on after years of darkness, children on the block cheered. Lila watched in awe, standing beside her grandmother. "You did this?" she asked him. "No," Marcus said softly. "You did. You showed me where the light was missing." That night, as the volunteers packed up, he noticed Lila helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries inside without being asked. She waved when she caught him watching. "Grandma says you should not wait to be thanked to do something kind." Marcus smiled, realizing how much of his own lessons came now from this child. The next day, at his office downtown, his colleagues and investors gathered for a quarterly review. The conference room was full of suits and screens, the air thick with talk of numbers and profit margins. Yet when Marcus took the podium, his speech was different. "I used to think leadership was about control," he said. "But I have learned that it is about compassion. True growth is not measured in wealth but in the lives we touch." The room fell silent. Some executives exchanged glances, uncertain how to respond. But one young manager clapped, and slowly others joined in. When he returned home that evening, Sophie ran to him with a drawing she and Lila had made. It showed their neighborhood, the lake, and the Hale mansion, all connected by a long ribbon of light. "Lila says the light is kindness," Sophie explained, "and that it can stretch anywhere." Marcus studied the picture, his heart swelling. "Then we will keep it burning," he said. On Sunday, Marcus drove both girls and Lila's grandmother to church. It was a small building with peeling paint but a full choir. As the congregation sang, Lila squeezed Sophie's hand. Marcus sat beside them, feeling a strange stillness, as if time had paused just long enough for him to breathe. When the pastor spoke about mercy, Marcus felt the words land deep inside him. Mercy, he thought, was not a word for weakness. It was strength that healed. After the service, Lila's grandmother turned to him. "You look lighter, Marcus," she said with a kind smile. "Maybe you finally let go of what was holding you down." "Maybe I did," he replied. "Or maybe someone taught me how." That evening, back at the mansion, the sunset spilled over the garden in soft gold. Lila and Sophie sat under the old oak tree, stringing tiny beads to make friendship bracelets. Marcus watched them from the balcony, feeling that familiar quiet warmth spread through him. The wind carried their laughter like music, wrapping around the house and settling in the corners where silence used to live. He realized then that redemption did not always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it came quietly in the small hands that rebuilt trust, in the laughter that softened hardened hearts, in the bravery of a little girl who saw good where others saw walls. As night fell, Marcus turned off the lights in his office and walked past the framed drawing of the lake. For the first time, he whispered the words he once taught Sophie, but this time they carried a deeper truth. Kindness is not weakness. It is the light that finds us when we are lost. Outside, the stars blinked faintly, and somewhere in the dark city below, a new streetlight glowed bright, keeping its silent promise to the child who had reminded them all what it meant to care. The story of Marcus Hale's new mission spread faster than he ever expected. News stations that once followed his business ventures now turned their cameras toward the quiet transformation of Maple Avenue. Reporters called it the Light Project, a movement born from a little girl's act of courage. At first, Marcus felt proud, not for himself, but for Lila, who had inspired it all. But soon, whispers began to follow the praise. Some journalists suggested that the billionaire's philanthropy was only an image strategy, a way to soften his corporate reputation. They called him opportunistic, claiming his kindness was calculated. Headlines began to twist the story, painting Marcus as a man chasing redemption to save his brand. It started with one article that said, "From scandal to savior, Marcus Hale's PR miracle." Then came the social media storm. Comments flooded in, some cruel, some mocking. Lila saw one of the posts at school. A classmate shoved her phone toward her face. "So your hero is fake?" the girl sneered. "Guess rich people only help when cameras are on." Lila's heart pounded. She did not know what to say. She ran to the bathroom, locked the stall, and held her breath as tears stung her eyes. When she came home that afternoon, she was quiet. Sophie noticed immediately. "What happened?" she asked. Lila shook her head. "Nothing." But later that evening, when Marcus returned from work, he sensed the tension in the air. The girls were silent at dinner, the laughter gone. "Lila," he said gently, "did something happen today?" She hesitated, eyes on her plate. "People are saying bad things about you online," she whispered. "They said you only helped us for attention." Marcus's fork froze halfway to his mouth. The words hit him harder than any headline could. "And what do you think?" he asked softly. Lila looked up, her small face conflicted. "I do not know. You do so many nice things, but everyone keeps watching. Maybe they are right. Maybe they would not care if I had not saved Sophie." The room fell silent. Sophie's eyes widened, hurt flickering across her face. "That is not true," she said quickly. "My dad loves you. He helps because of you." Lila's voice broke. "I did not want this. I just wanted people to be kind." Marcus reached across the table, his voice calm but heavy. "Lila, what you did started something real. People will always talk. They will try to make light look like a trick because they do not understand it. But what if they make you stop helping?" she asked, her lip trembling. "Then they win." He leaned closer. "Do you remember what you told me at the lake? That being brave means doing what is right even when you are scared." This is one of those moments. Her eyes filled with tears. "I do not like being famous," she said. "I do not want people to look at me." Then do not look back at them, Marcus said softly. Just keep looking at what is good. That night, after the girls went to bed, Marcus sat in his office reading the headlines again. Each word felt like a stone pressing down on his chest. He had faced criticism before in business, but this was different. This time, it was not about profits or failure. It was about the one thing he had rebuilt with honesty trust. His assistant, Michael, called. "Sir, do you want me to release a statement?" Marcus stared at the glowing screen, thinking of Lila's tearful eyes. "No," he said finally. "Let the truth speak for itself." The next day, cameras gathered outside the mansion gates. Photographers shouted questions as Marcus drove Sophie and Lila to school. "Mr. Hale, is your charity a publicity stunt? Did you use the girl's story to save your image?" Lila gripped Sophie's hand tightly in the back seat, her heart pounding. Marcus kept his gaze forward, jaw set, saying nothing. At school drop-off, he knelt beside them. "Listen to me," he said firmly but gently. "Do not believe noise, believe actions." Lila nodded faintly, though her face was pale. When he drove away, she watched him through the car window, wondering how someone could stay so calm when the world seemed to throw stones at him. That afternoon, the storm grew louder. A television talk show host mocked the project, calling it a performance. By evening, Marcus's investors began to call, warning that his reputation could hurt their partnerships. He refused to answer. Instead, he went back to Maple Avenue, walking alone among the newly repaired streetlights. The neighborhood was quiet. A few children waved from their porches, unaware of the headlines. To them, he was just the man who fixed the lights, and in that small moment, surrounded by simple gratitude, Marcus felt something steady inside him, an anchor against the noise. Back at home, Lila sat by her window, clutching the silver bracelet. The moonlight caught its curve, making it glow softly. "They can say whatever they want," she whispered to herself. "He knows the truth." Downstairs, Marcus stood in his study, staring at the same bracelet's reflection in the framed drawing on his desk. Two figures in the lake, one saving the other. Both saved in different ways. Outside, the storm of opinions raged on. But inside that house, the light of what was true remained untouched, burning quietly, waiting for the world to remember what real courage looked like. The morning after the media storm, the air inside the Hale mansion felt heavy, like the calm before thunder. Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table, the newspaper spread out in front of him. His name was printed in bold letters again, this time beside a photograph of him smiling with Lila and Sophie at the community pool. The headline read, "Billionaire exploits child hero for sympathy campaign." He folded the paper slowly, his jaw tight. Upstairs, the girls were getting ready for school, unaware that the world outside was questioning everything that had once seemed pure. When Sophie ran down the stairs with her backpack, she stopped short, sensing the change in her father's expression. "Dad, is everything okay?" she asked. Marcus forced a smile. "Everything will be okay." Lila appeared behind her, quiet, holding the edge of her bag strap. Her eyes flicked toward the folded newspaper on the table. She had seen the picture. "Maybe I should not go to school today," she whispered. "Everyone keeps talking." "No," Marcus said gently. "You go. You hold your head high. The truth does not disappear because people twist it." His voice was steady, but inside he felt the weight of doubt pressing against his ribs. After they left, he sat in silence, staring at the cup of coffee gone cold. Later that morning, his phone buzzed with messages from investors, partners, and friends who had grown suddenly distant. Some expressed concern. Others hinted that his involvement with Lila's story was damaging his credibility. By afternoon, one of his company board members called. "Marcus, the public is questioning your motives. It might be wise to step back from this project for now." Marcus stared out the window, watching rain streak down the glass. "Step back from helping?" he asked quietly. "That is not a project. That is life." The voice on the other end hesitated. "I know, but perception matters. Maybe take a break. Stay quiet for a while." Marcus ended the call without replying. The rain outside turned heavier, drumming softly on the glass roof of the conservatory. By evening, Lila returned from school with slumped shoulders. She had tried to ignore the whispers in the hallways, but they followed her like shadows. "She is the fake hero's pet," someone had said behind her. Another whispered, "Her grandma probably got paid." She had walked faster, pretending not to hear, but the words clung to her like wet clothes. When Marcus greeted her at the door, she tried to smile but could not. "It is okay," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "You do not have to be strong all the time." Her voice cracked. "They think I lied. They said we made up the story about the lake." Marcus felt something inside him snap quietly, not in anger but in heartbreak. "You know what happened," he said. "Sophie knows. I know. That is all that matters." "But it does not feel like enough," she whispered. "When everyone keeps saying it was fake, it starts to sound true." He took her hand, his voice low but firm. "The truth does not change because people are loud. It waits for the right moment to be seen again." Lila nodded slowly, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Upstairs, Sophie sat on her bed, listening through the half-open door. She felt guilt blooming in her chest. It was her father's name on the news, but it was Lila's heart being torn apart by it. Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, Sophie crept into Lila's room. The moonlight spilled across the floor. "You should not listen to them," Sophie whispered. "I do not care what they say." Lila turned toward her, eyes glistening. "I just wanted people to be kind. I did not mean to make trouble." Sophie hugged her tightly. "You did not. You made the world better. It is just that some people do not like seeing good things they did not do themselves." Down the hallway, Marcus stood outside their door, listening. The sound of their small voices filled him with both sorrow and pride. He realized that silence was no longer strength. The next morning, he stood before the mirror in his office, adjusting his tie. The reflection staring back at him was not the same man who once measured success in numbers. This man had lines carved by regret and eyes softened by truth. He opened his laptop and typed a single message on his company's public page. "I have nothing to hide. Every act of kindness that has happened these past months was inspired by a little girl named Lila, who reminded me what courage looks like. If that offends anyone, I accept it, but I will not apologize for believing in light." Then he turned off the phone and drove to Maple Avenue alone. The streetlights he had repaired weeks ago still shone, untouched by rumor. Children played in puddles under their glow, laughing freely. When Marcus stepped out of the car, an old man from the neighborhood nodded to him. "Pay no mind to the noise, son," the man said. "We know who fixed our lights." Marcus smiled faintly. "Thank you." That evening, as he returned home, the girls ran to greet him. "Did the bad people stop talking?" Sophie asked. Marcus smiled and shook his head. "No, but I stopped listening." Lila tilted her head. "Does that make it easier?" "Not easier," he said softly, "just clearer." They stood together in the fading light, three figures bound not by wealth or fame, but by the quiet truth that doing what is right often comes with pain, and that holding on to that truth was the bravest act of all. Outside, the world kept talking, but inside the house, there was peace, fragile yet strong, like the reflection of moonlight on still water. Days turned into weeks, but the noise outside did not fade. The headlines changed tone from curiosity to cruelty. Some said Lila had been coached. Others claimed the video of the rescue was edited. One cruel rumor said the entire event had been staged for sympathy. Lila's grandmother stopped watching television altogether. Each time she saw the news, her heart tightened with anger and helplessness. Lila tried to ignore it, but the whispers at school grew sharper. Her classmates began to avoid her. The same children who once called her brave now looked at her like a stranger. One afternoon, as she sat alone at lunch, she heard someone at the next table laugh. "Maybe she pushed the girl in herself," a voice said. The words pierced like ice. Lila stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor, and ran outside. She hid behind the gym building, her small hands covering her face. The silver bracelet on her wrist gleamed faintly in the sunlight, but even it felt heavy now, like proof of something people no longer believed in. Meanwhile, Marcus's company began to suffer. Investors withdrew support, and board members demanded that he step away from public projects until the controversy faded. "Your image is too polarizing right now," one advisor said coldly. You are costing us millions. Marcus stood in the boardroom, surrounded by people who had once praised him, and felt an ache deeper than anger. If helping others costs millions, he said quietly, then maybe I have been counting the wrong kind of wealth. He left the meeting before anyone could respond. That evening, when he arrived home, the mansion felt different. The usual light of laughter had dimmed. Sophie sat in the living room, clutching a pillow. Dad, she said softly, Lila's not answering my calls. His stomach dropped. He grabbed his coat and keys. Where is her grandmother? She said Lila came home upset after school and went to her room, Sophie replied. But now no one is picking up. Marcus's heart raced as he drove through the dark streets toward Maple Avenue. The night air was thick with rain, and thunder rolled across the sky. When he reached the apartment building, he found the door slightly open. Inside, the lights were off except for a dim lamp on the table. Lila's grandmother sat in a chair, her face pale with worry. She is gone, she whispered. She left this. She handed him a small folded note. Marcus unfolded it with trembling hands. The handwriting was careful and small. I did not mean to make things worse. I just wanted to help. Maybe people will stop being angry if I disappear for a while. I am sorry. His vision blurred for a moment. He looked at the grandmother, his voice hoarse. How long has she been gone? An hour, she said, maybe less. Without another word, Marcus ran back into the rain. He called Michael, his assistant. Alert the police. Send everyone you can to search the park near the lake. That is where she would go. The rain poured harder, soaking through his coat, but he kept running. The memory of that lake, the same one where she had once risked her life, pulled at him like gravity. When he reached it, the world was wrapped in fog. The surface of the water shimmered faintly under the storm clouds. Lila, he shouted, his voice breaking through the wind. Lila, it is me. For a long moment, there was only the sound of rain hitting the water. Then, faintly, he heard a voice. Mr. Hale? It came from near the dock. He ran toward it, his shoes splashing through puddles. There she was, sitting on the edge of the dock, soaked, shivering, her legs dangling over the water. I did not go far, she said quietly when he reached her. I just wanted to see the lake again. It is where everything started. Marcus knelt beside her, his heart pounding. You scared me, he said softly. I thought. His voice broke, and he took a deep breath. You do not have to run from the truth. Let them say what they want. We know what happened here. Lila looked at the dark water. I thought if I disappeared, maybe people would stop being mean. People are mean because they are afraid, he said gently. They do not understand courage that comes from a small voice. But disappearing only lets them win. She turned to him, her eyes glistening with tears. I just wanted things to go back to how they were before everyone knew me. Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief. I know, he said, but we cannot undo what is true. You saved my daughter's life, and you changed mine. That is not something to hide from. She took the handkerchief, pressing it against her face. I am tired, she whispered. Then rest, he said, but not here. Come home. He stood and offered his hand. She hesitated for a moment, then placed her small hand in his. The rain began to ease as they walked back toward the car, the storm giving way to a faint, silvery calm. Behind them, the lake rippled gently, as if keeping their secret safe. When they arrived home, Sophie ran to the door, tears streaming down her face. You are okay, she cried, hugging Lila tightly. Do not ever do that again. Lila nodded, her voice small. I will not. Marcus stood behind them, watching the two girls cling to each other, the weight of the night slowly lifting. He looked toward the window, where the rain had stopped, and whispered a silent promise. They will not break what we built, he said to himself. Not this time. Upstairs, in Sophie's room, the drawing of the lake hung above the bed, the light from the hallway reflecting off the silver frame. It seemed to glow softly, as if the lake itself were alive, reminding them that even when the world doubted, truth always waited beneath the surface, ready to rise again. The morning after Lila was found at the lake, the Hale mansion was quieter than usual. The storm had passed, but a heavy calm lingered, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Marcus sat at the dining table with a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the faint ripples of steam that barely rose anymore. Upstairs, Lila and Sophie were still asleep, their heads resting close together on the same pillow, the silver bracelet glinting faintly under the morning light. It was the first peaceful moment in days, and Marcus wanted it to last, but he knew the world outside was not ready to stay silent. His phone buzzed again and again with notifications, emails, headlines, statements from his company, but he ignored them all. For now, he only wanted to think about what mattered most. When the girls finally woke, he made breakfast himself, pancakes, slightly uneven, the way Sophie liked them. Lila hesitated at the edge of the kitchen, as if unsure whether she still belonged. Marcus smiled gently. "You always belong here," he said. "Sit, eat." She nodded, sliding into the chair beside Sophie. The first few bites passed in silence, until Sophie broke it softly. "Lila, I am glad you came back. I prayed you would." Lila smiled faintly. "I almost did not, but then I heard him calling, and I realized running away does not make the truth disappear." Marcus looked at her with quiet pride. "You were brave to come back. You have been brave all along." Lila shook her head. "I am tired of being brave. I just want people to believe me." His voice was steady, filled with a calm certainty. They will. But he knew that faith alone would not be enough. After breakfast, Marcus called his assistant, Michael. "We are not hiding anymore," he said. "I want to hold a press conference. No statements, no lawyers, just honesty. The truth deserves to be heard from us, not twisted by others." Michael hesitated on the line. "Are you sure, sir? It could make things worse." "No," Marcus said firmly. "Lies make things worse. The truth heals." That afternoon, Sophie and Lila sat side by side in the living room, while Marcus prepared what he would say. The girls were nervous, whispering to each other about what might happen. Lila looked down at her silver bracelet and said softly, "I do not like cameras. They make me feel small." Sophie took her hand. "Then hold mine. We will face them together." When the time came, the three of them stepped outside to the courtyard where reporters had already gathered. The flash of cameras lit up like lightning, and the hum of voices filled the air. Marcus held up his hand for silence, his expression calm but firm. "I asked you all here," he began, "because I will not let the truth about this child be buried under gossip and greed." He turned slightly toward Lila, who sat beside Sophie, her hands clasped tightly. "This is Lila Brown. She saved my daughter's life. That is a fact. There were witnesses, there was video, and there was courage no amount of doubt can erase. She did not ask for attention. She asked for kindness. And I failed to protect her from what came next. For that, I take full responsibility." The crowd murmured. Cameras clicked. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "I built a world on power and success, and I forgot what it meant to fight for something pure." Lila reminded me. "So if anyone wants to question my intentions, do it. But leave this child out of it. She has carried enough." Then, to everyone's surprise, Sophie stood and spoke, her small voice cutting through the noise. "I was there when she saved me," she said clearly. "I remember the water, and I remember her hand pulling me up. She did not think about who I was. She just wanted to help. That is what heroes do." Lila's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed silent, clutching Sophie's hand. The moment hung in the air like sunlight after rain. One of the reporters asked quietly, "Mr. Hale, are you saying you plan to continue your projects even after the backlash?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, because what started at that lake was never about money or headlines. It was about change. Real change does not stop because people misunderstand it." That night, the story broke again, but this time, the tone was different. The video from the press conference spread across social media, and thousands of people began sharing messages of support for Lila. The hashtag #BelieveLila started trending, and strangers wrote messages like, "Thank you for reminding us what courage looks like." For the first time in weeks, hope felt real again. When Marcus showed Lila the messages, she covered her mouth in disbelief. "They believe me," she whispered. "They finally believe me." "Of course they do," Marcus said softly. The truth always finds its voice. Later that evening, Sophie fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on Lila's shoulder. Marcus watched them from the doorway, his heart full. The storm had not passed completely, but for the first time, he felt they were standing in the light together. Lila looked up at him and said, "Mr. Hale, I think your light project worked." He smiled. "It was never mine. It was yours." Outside, the streetlights along the road glowed steadily, stretching far into the distance like a trail of faith reborn, each one carrying the same quiet message: the truth cannot be drowned forever. It always rises back to the surface, shining even brighter than before. The days that followed the press conference brought a fragile calm, the kind that hovers between relief and uncertainty. The truth had finally begun to take root, but the wounds left behind still lingered quietly. Marcus could see it in Lila's eyes every time a stranger looked too long or whispered her name. She was learning that fame, even the kind born from goodness, could be heavy to carry. Yet despite everything, there was light. Donations began pouring in for the community project Marcus had started. Letters arrived at the mansion, handwritten by children and adults alike, each one thanking Lila for reminding them to be brave and kind. Some sent small drawings, others sent words of hope. Lila spent hours reading them all, her eyes soft with wonder. "They do not even know me," she said one evening, her voice quiet but full of awe. "But they care." Marcus smiled. "That is how kindness works. It travels farther than we think." Still, even with the growing support, Marcus could not shake the guilt that he had failed to protect her from the pain that came before it. He found himself waking early, driving aimlessly through the city before sunrise, as if searching for something he could not name. One morning, he ended up back at the lake, the place where everything had begun. The water was calm, reflecting the early pink glow of dawn. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, the cool air stinging his face. It had been months since that day, but he could still see it clearly: the splash, the panic, the small voice shouting, "Hold on." He realized then that while Lila had saved his daughter, she had also saved something inside him that he thought had drowned years ago. Later that afternoon, when he returned home, he found a letter waiting on his desk. It was from one of his company's international branches, informing him of an urgent matter that required his presence overseas for several weeks. He hesitated. Leaving now felt wrong, but he also knew that running from responsibility was not the lesson Lila had taught him. That evening, he gathered Lila, Sophie, and Lila's grandmother in the living room. "I need to travel for a short while," he said. "There are things I have to fix." Lila frowned. "You are leaving?" "Just for a bit," Marcus said gently. "But while I am gone, I want you to keep doing what you do best, helping others. That light you started does not need me to keep shining." Lila looked uncertain. "What if people stop believing again?" Marcus knelt beside her. "Then you remind them. You have already shown them what truth looks like." Sophie reached over and squeezed her hand. "We will do it together." That night, as the house grew quiet, Marcus sat in his office writing letters. One was to Sophie, reminding her that bravery is not loud but steady. The other was to Lila, thanking her for teaching him the meaning of grace. When he finished, he folded them carefully and placed them in his drawer, planning to give them before he left. The next morning, he said goodbye at the airport. Lila hugged him tightly. "You promise you will come back?" she asked. "I promise," he said. "And when I do, I want to see the lake again with both of you smiling by it." He smiled as he turned to leave. But as the doors closed behind him, a quiet fear tugged at the edges of Lila's heart. In the weeks that followed, she and Sophie threw themselves into their school projects and community work. They visited the neighborhood regularly, painting benches and helping children learn to swim at the new public pool Marcus had funded. Lila had started teaching small kids how to float, just like she had taught Sophie. She would stand by the water's edge and say softly, "Do not fight it. The water will hold you if you let it." The children trusted her instantly, her voice calm and sure. Her grandmother often watched from the sidelines, pride shining in her eyes. "You were born to teach," she told her. Lila smiled. Maybe one day. But one gray afternoon, as they were packing up after lessons, a call came through from Michael. His voice was steady but strained. "Mrs. Brown," he said carefully, "there has been an accident overseas." Mr. Hale's plane was caught in a storm. We do not have details yet. The phone slipped slightly in her grandmother's hand. Lila froze, her body cold all over. Is he okay? She whispered. Michael hesitated. We do not know. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The sounds of the pool faded, replaced by the faint hum of wind through the open door. Lila felt her throat tighten. He said he would come back, she whispered again, her voice trembling. Her grandmother knelt beside her. We do not know anything yet, baby. We pray. That is what we do. That night, Lila could not sleep. The rain tapped softly against the window, echoing like the memory of that first storm at the lake. She sat up, clutching her bracelet. Please let him be okay, she whispered to the quiet room. He keeps his promises. Miles away, in another time zone, search teams combed the area where the plane had gone down. There was wreckage but no confirmation. The world waited for news. Back home, Lila waited too, her hope flickering like a candle in the wind. And though no one could see it, that same light, the one she had started, continued to glow faintly across the city, in every streetlight, every window, every heart that had once heard her story. It was as if kindness itself refused to fade, holding its breath until he came home. The next 3 days moved like shadows across the Hale mansion, each hour filled with waiting and silence. News of the plane crash had spread across the media, and though officials confirmed they had found parts of the wreckage, they had not found Marcus Hale. The uncertainty hung over everything like fog. Sophie stopped eating. Lila sat by the window every evening, staring at the distant lights of the city as if hoping one of them would blink back with news. The adults tried to shield the children from the television, but whispers still reached their ears. Words like "no survivors" and "presumed lost" echoed in the corners of the house where hope had begun to fade. On the fourth morning, Lila woke before dawn and walked quietly to the lake. The air was cold, and the mist rolled low across the water. She sat on the dock where Marcus had found her that stormy night, her small hands clasped around her silver bracelet. You said you would come back, she whispered to the still water. You always keep your promises. The surface rippled slightly, reflecting the pale morning sky. She closed her eyes and let the wind move through her hair, remembering the sound of his voice, calm, steady, full of warmth. When she returned home, Sophie was sitting in the kitchen with her grandmother, her eyes red and swollen. They are still searching, Sophie said quietly. Michael said they are sending more people to look near the coast. Lila nodded, trying to be strong, but her voice wavered. We have to believe he is alive. The grandmother looked at both girls and said softly, Belief is a kind of light, girls. Even when you cannot see it, it still burns. That night, they decided to hold a candlelight vigil at the lake. Neighbors came, some from Maple Avenue, others from the city, people whose lives had been touched by the light project. They gathered under the twilight sky, holding candles that flickered in the gentle wind. A soft hum of prayers and whispers filled the air. Lila stood in the front row beside Sophie, her face glowing in the candlelight. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Mr. Hale once told me that truth waits for the right moment to be seen again. I think kindness is like that too. It does not disappear, it just hides until someone is brave enough to find it. Her voice trembled but did not break. He taught me that the world is not changed by big people or rich people. It is changed by small ones who do not give up. So we will not give up either. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then someone began to clap softly, and soon the applause spread like a wave through the crowd. The lake shimmered in the candlelight, 1,000 reflections of faith dancing on its surface. When the vigil ended, Lila and Sophie stayed behind. They sat together, watching the candles float gently away across the water. Do you think he can see them? Sophie asked. I think so, Lila said. He said kindness travels far, remember? Sophie nodded, resting her head on Lila's shoulder. Then maybe he can feel it, wherever he is. Days passed. The world moved on, but in the Hale mansion, time seemed to hold its breath. Letters of sympathy arrived daily, but none of them brought comfort. Then, on the 7th morning, as rain drizzled softly outside, Michael's car pulled up to the gate. The grandmother opened the door, her heart pounding. Please tell me, she whispered. Michael looked exhausted, but there was a spark in his eyes. "They found him," he said. "He is alive." For a moment, no one moved. Then Sophie gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Alive?" Michael nodded, tears filling his eyes. The storm brought the plane down near the mountains. He and 2 others survived. He was injured, but he is coming home. The grandmother began to cry quietly, her hands clasped together in prayer. Lila stood frozen, unable to speak. The news felt too big, too bright, almost unreal. When the car arrived that evening, Sophie and Lila stood at the top of the steps, waiting. The door opened slowly, and Marcus stepped out, leaning slightly on a crutch. His face was pale, his arm bandaged, but his smile was unmistakable. Sophie ran to him first, wrapping her arms around his waist. "You promised," she cried. "You promised you would come back." He held her close, his voice thick with emotion. "I keep my promises." Then he looked up and saw Lila standing there, tears streaming down her cheeks. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "I told them you would." He smiled, his voice barely above a breath. "I heard you, every word." The house filled with life again that night. Neighbors stopped by to welcome him home, and laughter returned to the walls that had been silent for too long. When things finally grew quiet, Marcus stepped outside to the balcony, looking at the glowing city below. Lila joined him, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "You scared us," she said softly. "I scared myself," he admitted. "But something kept me going. I thought about the lake, about what you said, that light does not disappear." She smiled. "It does not. It just waits." He nodded slowly. "You were right, Lila. It waited for me." They stood there together under the night sky, the glow of the city lights stretching endlessly into the dark, like a promise reborn. Somewhere far below, the lake shimmered quietly, holding their reflection in its silver surface, a reminder that even when the world breaks, faith and kindness can piece it back together again. The weeks after Marcus's return were filled with a quiet kind of celebration, the kind that does not need grand gestures to be felt. The Hale mansion, once echoing with silence, now pulsed with life again. Every morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows, carrying the sound of Sophie's laughter and the smell of pancakes that Lila helped to make. Marcus still moved carefully, his crutch tapping softly against the marble floors, but there was a steadiness in his steps that came from gratitude, not strength. He had survived a storm, not only in the sky but in his heart, and he knew the reason why. One afternoon, as autumn began to paint the trees gold, Marcus gathered everyone in the garden. The air was crisp, the leaves crackling underfoot, and the lake shimmered faintly in the distance. "I have been thinking," he began, his voice calm but filled with warmth, "about what it means to begin again. When I was in that wreckage, all I could think of was this, of home, of kindness, of promises. So I want to start something new, something that lasts." Lila and Sophie exchanged a curious glance. "What kind of something?" Sophie asked. Marcus smiled. "A foundation, one that helps children who save the world in small ways. Just like you, Lila. It will fund scholarships, build swimming programs, and help families who need a second chance." Lila's eyes widened. "You are naming it after me?" He chuckled softly. "Not just you. It will be called The Light Within, because that is what you gave us, the reminder that every person carries light inside, no matter how dark the world becomes." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lila whispered, "That is beautiful." Sophie clapped her hands together, her face glowing. "Can I help?" Marcus laughed. "You both will. This is your project as much as mine." The following weeks were a whirlwind of planning. Marcus worked with lawyers, designers, and community leaders to bring the foundation to life, but he refused to make it about fame. There were no grand press releases or celebrity fundraisers. Instead, he hosted small gatherings in schools and local centers, letting Lila share her story in her own words. At first, she was nervous standing in front of the crowd, her small hands trembling as she held the microphone. But once she began to speak, her voice grew stronger. "You do not have to be rich or famous to make a difference," she said. "Sometimes the smallest thing, helping, listening, being kind, changes everything." People listened, some with tears in their eyes. Afterward, children came up to hug her, thanking her for making them believe they could be brave too. Marcus watched from the side, his heart full. Every word she spoke was a piece of the healing they both needed. One afternoon, after an event at a community center, Marcus and Lila walked to the nearby lake where the Foundation's first swimming program would begin. The water sparkled in the late afternoon sun, calm and clear. "You know," Marcus said softly, "this lake used to remind me of fear. Now it reminds me of courage." Lila smiled. "Because you did not give up." "No," he said, "because you did not." They stood in silence for a while, the gentle sound of rippling water surrounding them. Lila bent down and tossed a small pebble into the lake. "Do you think people will forget one day?" she asked quietly. "Forget about all of this?" Marcus shook his head. "Maybe they will forget the story, but not the feeling. That is what lasts." Back at home, Sophie was waiting with a surprise. She had spent the entire afternoon painting a banner for the new foundation. The words stretched across the canvas in bright, uneven letters. "The light within kindness never dies." Lila's eyes shimmered as she read it. "That is perfect," she said softly. Marcus smiled. "You two are my greatest teachers." That night, as the house settled into quiet, Marcus sat by the window in his study. The city glowed below, lights scattered like tiny stars. He opened his journal, a habit he had begun after the accident, and wrote, "The girl who saved my daughter also saved my soul. I have learned that redemption is not something you earn. It is something given to you through the courage of others." He closed the book and looked up at the moon, feeling a calm he had never known before. In the room down the hall, Lila and Sophie were still awake, whispering stories about what they would do when they grew up. "I think I want to be a teacher," Lila said. "Or maybe a swimmer." "You can be both," Sophie replied sleepily. "You already are." Their laughter drifted softly through the hall, weaving into the quiet night. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying with it the sound of peace. The world was still imperfect, still loud and chaotic, but inside the Hale mansion there was a truth that no storm could shake. Kindness, once planted, grows roots too deep to be washed away. And for Marcus, for Sophie, and for Lila, it was enough to know that no matter what came next, the light within them would never fade again. Winter came slowly that year, wrapping the Hale mansion and the city in a soft silver hush. The trees outside stood bare, their branches dusted with frost, and the lake had turned to glass, its surface frozen but still shining under the pale sunlight. Inside the house, warmth bloomed in every corner. Lila had begun visiting every afternoon after school, her laughter blending easily with Sophie's. The two girls filled the house with stories, baking attempts, and endless questions about how the world worked. Marcus often sat nearby, listening quietly, feeling the peace that came from ordinary moments. It had been months since the Foundation's launch, and the light within had grown beyond what any of them imagined. Schools wrote letters asking for mentorship programs, communities reached out for partnerships, and other families shared stories of children who had done extraordinary acts of kindness. But through all the success, Marcus made one rule clear: every story shared had to honor truth, not spectacle. "We do not make heroes out of fame," he told his team. "We make heroes out of compassion." Lila took that to heart. She had become the heart of the Foundation, visiting schools and reading letters from other children who wanted to make a difference. One letter in particular stayed with her. It was from a boy named David, who lived in a small town near the mountains. He wrote about how his sister had been bullied and how he wanted to start a kindness club in her honor. His words were simple but powerful. "I think being brave means helping people even when no one is watching." Lila showed the letter to Marcus. "Can we help him?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "Of course we can." A week later, they drove to the small town together, Sophie tagging along with her sketchbook. The drive took them through winding roads lined with snow, the sky heavy with clouds that looked like soft gray wool. When they arrived, David and his family met them outside a small school. He was about Lila's age, with curious eyes and a shy smile. "I did not think you would really come," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. Lila grinned. "When someone wants to spread kindness, we always come." Together, they spent the day helping the students set up the kindness club. They painted a mural on the school's gym wall, a tree with open hands as branches and small hearts as leaves. Each child dipped their hand in bright paint and pressed it against the wall, leaving their mark. When it was Lila's turn, She placed her hand near the center, her silver bracelet glinting in the winter light. "It is like the lake," she whispered. "Every ripple starts with one touch." David nodded. "Then let's make a lot of ripples." By the time they returned home that night, the car was filled with laughter and the faint smell of hot cocoa from the small cafe they had stopped at along the way. Marcus looked at the two girls in the back seat, their heads leaning together, and felt a quiet joy settle deep inside him. This, he realized, was the life he had never known he needed. That night, as snow began to fall gently outside, Marcus sat by the fireplace, reading over the new letters that had arrived for the foundation. One was from a school principal who wanted to install new streetlights for safety. Another was from a girl who wanted to organize a food drive. Each letter, he thought, was a spark in the dark, proof that one act of courage could light up the world. Lila entered the room quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You should rest," she said. "You work too much." He chuckled softly. "I could say the same about you." She sat beside him, curling her legs under the blanket. "Do you ever think about the lake?" she asked. "Every day," he said. "It used to remind me of what I almost lost. Now it reminds me of what I found." She smiled. "Do you think the light will ever stop spreading?" "No," he said gently. "Because it does not come from us anymore. It comes from everyone who believes in it." Later that night, while the world outside slept under a blanket of snow, Marcus walked to the window and looked out at the frozen lake. The moonlight cast a silver path across the ice, glowing softly. He thought about how everything in his life had changed because of one small, fearless child. Behind him, Lila's laughter echoed faintly from down the hall, mixing with Sophie's, 2 voices full of life and promise. He smiled to himself and whispered, "The light within." Upstairs, Lila stood by her window, looking at the same moon. She could see her reflection faintly in the glass, the bracelet on her wrist shimmering like a tiny star. She did not know what the future would hold, but she felt sure of one thing: the world was wide, and kindness, once set free, could travel farther than anyone could ever measure. As she drifted to sleep, the snow outside continued to fall, each flake catching the light before it disappeared into the earth, quiet but unforgotten, like every act of good that ever was. Spring arrived quietly, melting the last traces of snow from the Hale estate. The air carried the scent of new beginnings, of rain and soil and blooming life. The Light Within Foundation had become a steady rhythm in their lives, growing in ways none of them had expected. Marcus spent his mornings at the office, his afternoons mentoring young volunteers, and his evenings at home with the girls. Lila, now a small local celebrity though she never wanted to be one, had learned to speak to crowds with gentle confidence. She was still the same girl who once sat quietly by the lake, but now there was a calm wisdom in her eyes, as if she carried the reflection of everything she had survived. Sophie, always beside her, became her shadow and her laughter. Together, they were inseparable, bound by something deeper than friendship, a kind of shared light that made everyone around them believe in better days. One warm afternoon, Marcus drove them to Maple Avenue to visit Lila's grandmother. The old street looked different now. The cracked sidewalks had been repaired, new lampposts lined the road, and children were playing basketball in the park. It was no longer the forgotten neighborhood it once was. As they parked, Lila smiled. "It feels brighter," she said. "Because you made it brighter," Marcus replied. Her grandmother greeted them at the door, her hair wrapped in a colorful scarf, her eyes full of pride. "You've been keeping busy, haven't you?" she said, hugging Lila tightly. "Trying to," Lila laughed. They spent the afternoon cooking, talking, and listening to old records that crackled softly through the speakers. Marcus helped fix a loose window frame, while the girls made cookies that filled the house with the smell of vanilla. At one point, the grandmother looked over at Marcus and said softly, "You know, I think she has changed you." Marcus paused and smiled. "More than she'll ever know." "Good," the grandmother said, "because I think the world needs more men who listen to children." That night, as they drove home, the sunset painted the horizon gold. Lila rested her head against the car window, watching the sky fade into soft pink. "Mr. Hale," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said. "When you were lost after the crash, what did you think about the most?" He glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "You and Sophie," he said. "And the lake. I kept hearing your voice in my head, telling me that light does not disappear." I held on to that. "It felt like you were there." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I was." Sophie leaned forward from the back seat. "Then you saved him twice, Lila." Lila laughed softly. "Maybe we saved each other." As the weeks passed, the foundation launched a new initiative called Project Ripple. It was designed to connect schools across the country, encouraging children to start kindness programs in their own communities. Marcus made sure that Lila was part of every planning meeting, her ideas written down beside his. "It should not just be about helping," Lila said one day during a meeting. "It should be about listening. Sometimes people just need to know that someone hears them." Marcus nodded. "Then that is what we will do." They recorded a short video to introduce the project, filmed by a local team at the lake, where everything began. In the video, Lila stood on the dock, her silver bracelet shining in the sunday. "Kindness," she said softly, "is like the lake. When you touch it, it moves. Even if you cannot see how far the ripples go, they keep moving, farther than you imagine." The video went viral within days. Schools began writing letters, sharing how their students started projects inspired by the light within. Some planted trees, others built free book libraries, and one school even organized a kindness marathon, where students ran laps to raise money for families in need. Every time Marcus shared these stories with Lila, she would shake her head, amazed. "All of this from one day at the lake," she whispered once. "From one jump. From one heart," Marcus corrected gently. One evening, they held a celebration for the first anniversary of the light within. The event was small but full of joy, children laughing, families hugging, music playing softly in the background. Marcus gave a short speech, thanking everyone for believing in something bigger than themselves. Then he turned to Lila. "None of this would exist without her," he said. "She reminded us that the smallest act of courage can change everything." Lila blushed, shaking her head. "It was not just me," she said quietly. "It was all of us." Later that night, as the party ended and the lights dimmed, Marcus found her standing near the edge of the garden, looking at the reflection of the moon in the fountain. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About the future," she said. "Sometimes I wonder what will happen when people forget." "Then we remind them," he said, "again and again." She nodded, her voice soft. "You always make it sound simple." "Because it is," he said. "The truth is simple. The light never ends, it only moves from one heart to another." They stood there together in silence, the sound of crickets rising around them, the world calm and full. Above them, the stars shimmered faintly, reflected in the still water below. It felt, in that moment, like the lake had followed them wherever they went, a quiet witness to everything they had built, and everything they were still becoming. Summer came with long golden days and the kind of warmth that made everything feel possible. The Light Within Foundation had grown into something far larger than Marcus ever dreamed, spreading across states, connecting thousands of children through shared acts of kindness. Schools held ripple days, towns planted gardens in empty lots, and volunteers cleaned up rivers and playgrounds in the name of the project. Yet despite the growing fame, Marcus insisted on keeping the heart of it small and honest. It started with one child, he would remind everyone, so it should always remember the heart of one child. For Lila, this summer was unlike any she had ever known. She spent her mornings at the Foundation's new youth center, helping organize letters and boxes of donated supplies, and her afternoons at the community pool, teaching younger kids how to swim. The laughter that echoed off the water made her feel alive in a way nothing else could. Sophie was always nearby, cheering on the nervous swimmers or drawing chalk hearts on the sidewalk that led to the entrance. "You are the best teacher," Sophie told her one afternoon as they sat on the pool steps with their feet in the water. Lila smiled. "That is because I remember what it feels like to be scared." Marcus watched from the shade of a nearby tree, his heart swelling with quiet pride. He had started his empire with ambition, but now he was building something made of meaning. That evening, he gathered Lila, Sophie, and Lila's grandmother for dinner at the mansion. The table was covered with fresh flowers and glowing candles, the windows open to the soft summer wind. "I have been thinking about the future of the foundation," he began. There are people who want to expand it internationally. Lila's eyes widened. Other countries? Yes, he said. They want to start programs in places that do not have the same opportunities. It could change a lot of lives. Lila leaned forward, her voice full of wonder. Do you think I could visit one of them someday? Marcus smiled. I think you will do more than visit. You will lead them. Her grandmother chuckled softly. She is already leading half the city. The room filled with laughter, and for a moment everything felt effortless, like the world itself was holding its breath in gratitude. Later that night, when the girls had gone upstairs, Marcus stepped out into the garden. The moon was full, and the air carried the hum of crickets. He looked toward the lake at the edge of the property, the same lake that had once nearly taken his daughter and given him everything in return. He whispered softly to the night, "Thank you." A few days later, a letter arrived at the foundation's office addressed to Lila. It was from a woman in South Carolina who had watched one of her speeches online. The letter read, "When my house flooded last month, my son remembered your story. He said, 'Mom, the light does not disappear.' He gathered his friends, and they helped clean our street. Thank you for helping us believe again." Lila read it 3 times before showing it to Marcus. She said her son helped clean after the flood because of the project, she said, her eyes wide with emotion. Marcus nodded. "You see, that is what I mean. The light has already traveled farther than you can imagine." Lila pressed the letter to her chest. "It feels strange," she said, "to think people I have never met are changing their lives because of something I said." "That is how hope works," Marcus replied. "It always begins quietly." As the summer continued, the foundation prepared for its first anniversary gala, an event that would bring together all the children and families who had participated over the past year. The theme was simple. Light carried forward. The girls spent days helping decorate the hall, stringing hundreds of tiny paper lanterns along the ceiling. On the night of the event, the room glowed like a sky full of stars. Families arrived dressed in their best, laughter and chatter filling the air. When it was time for the ceremony, Marcus walked onto the stage with Lila and Sophie beside him. "1 year ago," he said, his voice steady and full, "a little girl reminded me what courage looks like. She jumped into a lake without thinking of herself, and she pulled my daughter from the water. But what she really did was save something much larger. She saved my belief in people." He turned to Lila. "Tonight, we celebrate her light, and all the light she has helped ignite in others." The crowd erupted in applause, but Lila's eyes filled with tears. When it was her turn to speak, she took a deep breath and said, "I used to think the world was too big for someone like me to change, but now I know it only takes one person to start a ripple. Maybe that person is you." The room fell silent for a heartbeat, and then the applause came again, louder this time, full of warmth. Later, as everyone released their lanterns outside, the sky filled with floating light. Lila stood beside Marcus, watching the lanterns drift upward. "They look like stars," she whispered. "They are," he said. "They are people's hopes, carried upward." She smiled, the reflection of the lanterns glowing in her eyes. "Then maybe one of them will find its way back to the lake." Marcus looked at her, his heart full. "It already has," he said softly. And as the lanterns rose higher into the night, the ripples of their light spread far beyond the lake, far beyond the city, reaching quietly into hearts that still needed to remember that kindness never dies. The autumn wind carried a quiet peace over the Hale mansion, rustling through the golden leaves and stirring the surface of the lake that had become both a memory and a promise. It had been nearly a year and a half since Lila had saved Sophie, and the world around them had changed in ways none of them could have predicted. The Light Within Foundation had become a living movement, spreading across cities and even into small towns where kindness had long been forgotten. Marcus often said it was no longer his foundation, it belonged to the people who believed in it. That belief had made him prouder than any fortune he had ever built. But with growth came challenges. Reporters returned, eager to recapture the story that had once captivated millions. They asked questions that Marcus no longer cared to answer. What mattered to him was not publicity, it was legacy. He wanted this light to live beyond his lifetime, and he knew the only person who could carry it forward was Lila. One crisp Saturday morning, he called her into his study. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, catching the dust in soft golden beams. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, clutching a notebook filled with her ideas for new projects. Marcus smiled. "I did. Sit down, Lila. I have something important to tell you." She sat across from him, curious, but calm. "You know how this all started," he began slowly. "You saved my daughter, and in doing so, you saved me. You gave me back something I had lost a long time ago, faith. But the truth is, I have been thinking about how to make sure that what you started never fades." Lila tilted her head, her expression serious. "You mean the light within?" "Yes," Marcus said. "It needs a future leader, someone who understands what it means to act without wanting anything in return, someone who sees people the way you do." She blinked, not quite understanding yet. "You are the leader," she said softly. "You built this." "No," he said gently. "We built it. You gave it its soul. And one day, when you are ready, it will be yours to lead." Her mouth parted slightly, her heart thudding in her chest. "Mine?" Marcus nodded. "Yours, not because of what you did that day at the lake, but because of who you have become since. You have turned courage into compassion, and that is rarer than anything else." Lila looked down at her hands, the silver bracelet glinting faintly against her wrist. "I do not know if I am ready for that," she said quietly. "You do not have to be," he replied. "Just promise me that you will keep believing in the same light that guided you that day. The rest will come." Later that afternoon, Lila went to the garden, sitting by the old oak tree with her notebook in her lap. The pages were filled with drawings, ideas for new programs, and messages from children she had met along the way. Sophie found her there, barefoot, her hair tangled from the wind. "Dad said you were going to run the foundation someday," Sophie said, sitting beside her. "He told you?" Lila asked, surprised. Sophie nodded. "He tells me everything important." Lila smiled softly. "I am not sure I can do what he does." "You already do," Sophie said simply. "You just do it in your own way." The wind blew gently through the trees, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the house where Marcus was talking with volunteers. Lila closed her notebook and looked out toward the lake. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked. Sophie followed her gaze. "Every time I see the water," she said. "But it does not scare me anymore." "Me neither," Lila whispered. "It feels like the lake is watching over us now." The next week, Marcus surprised them both with a small trip. He said it was for reflection, not work, and drove them up to the mountains where the air was clean and the world felt endless. They stayed in a small cabin overlooking a valley filled with golden trees. At night, the stars stretched like silver dust across the sky. Sitting by the fire, Marcus handed Lila a small wooden box. "What is it?" she asked. "Open it," he said. Inside was a necklace with a single charm shaped like a flame. It shimmered faintly in the light. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It is the same symbol we used for the light within," Marcus explained. "The flame is small, but it never dies. I wanted you to have it, as a reminder of what you carry." She touched the charm gently. "I will take care of it," she promised. He smiled. "I know you will." That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Lila stepped outside and looked up at the stars. The air was cold, her breath turning to mist. She held the necklace in her palm, feeling its weight and warmth. "You said the light never ends," she whispered, glancing toward the cabin window where Marcus's shadow moved softly behind the curtain. "So I will keep it burning. Always." The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment it sounded like the faint echo of waves lapping at the edge of the lake. Lila smiled to herself, her heart calm. She was no longer the little girl who had once jumped into the water without thinking. She was something more now, a keeper of light, a bridge between courage and hope, and though she did not yet know it, the path ahead would ask her to prove that truth once more, in a way that would test everything she had learned about kindness, faith, and the power of one small, unbreakable heart. The final days of summer arrived with a gentle warmth, the kind that made every leaf shimmer gold and the lake reflect the sky in endless blue. The Light Within Foundation had grown into a vast network of children, families, and communities, all committed to spreading kindness in ways big and small. Marcus watched Lila and Sophie from the veranda of the Hale mansion as they organized a new group of volunteers by the lake. Lila's silver bracelet caught the sunlight, glinting like a tiny star, and Marcus felt a quiet swell of pride. The lake, once a place of fear and rescue, had become a symbol of hope, reflecting the countless ripples of courage and compassion that began with a single brave act. Today, they were celebrating the Foundation's 2-year anniversary, but unlike other events, this one was simple and intimate. Children ran barefoot across the grass, carrying handmade banners, while parents gathered in small clusters, laughing and sharing stories of the good that had been done since the Foundation's inception. Marcus walked beside Lila, his eyes sweeping over the crowd. "Do you see it?" he asked softly. "Every life touched, every smile made, every hand held, it all started with you." Lila shook her head, her lips curved in a gentle smile. "I did not do it alone," she whispered. "I had you, Sophie, Grandma, and everyone who believed." He nodded, knowing that her humility was as powerful as her courage. The afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the water. Marcus called the children together and had them sit along the edge of the lake. Lila stood in front of them, her small frame strong and steady. She held a pebble in her hand and looked out across the water. "Do you remember when I jumped in to save Sophie?" she asked quietly. The children nodded, some wide-eyed, some smiling. "At first, I was scared," she continued. "I thought I could not do it. But then I realized something: being brave does not mean not being afraid. It means doing what is right anyway. And that is what each of you can do too. You do not need to be grown up or famous or rich. You just need to care, and you need to act." She dropped the pebble into the lake. The water rippled, sending concentric circles outward until they met the other ripples already there. "Every act of kindness is like this ripple," she said. "It moves farther than you can see, touching lives you may never know. That is the magic of courage and heart." The children cheered and clapped, and even the parents felt a lump in their throats at the quiet power of her words. Marcus felt a hand slip into his and looked down to see Sophie, beaming. "She is going to be amazing," Sophie whispered. Marcus nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "She already is." After the ceremony, they set hundreds of small lanterns afloat on the lake, each one a symbol of hope and light. Lila and Sophie watched as the lanterns drifted gently over the surface, the flames reflecting like stars in the water. "Look at them," Lila whispered. "They go on forever." Marcus smiled. "Just like the kindness you have started. It has no end." As the evening wore on, the sky darkened into a deep indigo, and the first stars began to shine. Lila sat quietly on the dock, watching the reflection of the lanterns mingle with the constellations above. Sophie rested her head on Lila's shoulder, tired but happy. Marcus stood nearby, looking down at them both, feeling the weight of gratitude settle deeply in his chest. He realized that the lake had given them more than memories. It had given them courage, compassion, and the understanding that one small act can truly change the world. That night, as the lantern's flames flickered and faded, the girls walked back to the mansion hand in hand. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of flowers and the promise of a new day. Lila glanced at the lake one last time. "We did it," she whispered. "All of it." Marcus knelt beside her. "No," he said softly. "You did it, and because of you, everyone here will carry it forward." She smiled, her heart full, knowing the truth of his words. The moon reflected across the water, silver and calm, and for the first time, she felt the weight of her journey lift. She had been scared, she had been brave, and now she was ready to lead. The lake, the mansion, the laughter, and the rippling water, all of it held the story of a small girl who dared to act, a billionaire who learned to believe again, and a world that would never forget the power of one courageous heart. The light within had reached its first milestone, but it was only the beginning. As they watched the stars shimmer above and the lanterns drift into memory, Marcus whispered to himself, "This is how change begins, with one heart, one act, and one unwavering courage." And Lila, holding Sophie's hand, felt that courage flow through her, ready to touch every corner of the world that would listen to the light she carried inside.